Two objects. Upper atmosphere. Mach 10, descending. Not aircraft. Not cruise missiles skimming the Earth at low altitude. These drop straight down out of the stratosphere on a near-vertical ballistic arc, and by the time the first radar return confirms re-entry, the clock to impact is already under 7 minutes. That is the entire timeline. 7 minutes from detection to detonation, if nothing stops them. This is what a DF-21 anti-ship ballistic missile looks like on the edge of its terminal phase. And in a saturation strike scenario, it does not come alone. Behind it, already descending on a slightly longer arc, are the DF-26 variants. Heavier, longer range, capable of a terminal maneuver that shifts their impact point in the final seconds, designed specifically to defeat a defense that has already computed a firing solution on a straight trajectory. Here's the question that drives this entire breakdown. Can a U.S. carrier strike group, a single aircraft carrier, its Arleigh Burke destroyers, its cruisers, its entire networked Aegis shield, actually stop a coordinated saturation salvo of both missile types at once? Not one inbound. Not a test. A deliberate, timed, multi-axis volley designed by people who have spent 20 years studying exactly how the American layered defense works and exactly where they believe it breaks. The answer is not a simple yes. It is a layered probability, and that is precisely the point. Stay with us, because what makes this scenario genuinely interesting is not the hardware. It is the math. And the math tells a story that neither side finds entirely comfortable. The Western Pacific. Open ocean, roughly 500 nautical miles east of the first island chain. A U.S. carrier strike group is operating in what the Navy calls a high-threat environment, which means the commanding admiral already knows that over the horizon, shore-based surveillance radars, over-the-horizon systems, and a constellation of reconnaissance satellites have been building a targeting picture on his ships for hours, possibly days. This is the fundamental asymmetry of modern naval power in the Pacific. The carrier strike group cannot hide. An American supercarrier, Nimitz class or Gerald R. Ford class, displaces roughly 100,000 tons. It generates a thermal signature, a radar cross-section, and a wake pattern visible from space. At cruising speed, the hull creates a distinctive white water disturbance stretching miles behind the ship, one that synthetic aperture radar satellites can image through cloud cover and at night. The question is never whether China knows where the carrier is. The question is whether the kill chain connecting that surveillance picture to a launch order and then to a functioning terminal seeker can be kept intact long enough to actually work. That kill chain has 5 links: find, fix, track, target, and terminal. Break any single link, and the missile hits the wrong ocean. The entire U.S. defensive posture in this scenario is built around attacking that chain at every link simultaneously, while also preparing to physically intercept whatever survives the upstream disruption. The strike group in our scenario consists of a Gerald R. Ford-class carrier at the center, 2 Arleigh Burke Flight 3 destroyers on the outer screen, 1 Ticonderoga-class cruiser, one of the last in the fleet, and a Los Angeles-class submarine running silent approximately 40 miles ahead of the formation. Supporting the air picture, an E-2D advanced Hawkeye is already airborne, flying a racetrack pattern at altitude, its rotating radar dome scanning an enormous volume of airspace, well beyond what any surface radar can see from sea level. Above the formation, a combat air patrol of 2 F/A-18 Super Hornets is up and ready. This is not a garrison force. This is an active combat posture, and every sensor in it is already listening. On the other side of this scenario, somewhere behind the horizon, ashore, a coordinated launch sequence has been authorized. First wave, 6 DF-21 missiles, the original Carrier Hunter variant, on high-lofted trajectories that will re-enter the atmosphere at a steep angle and at speeds approaching Mach 10. They carry radar-guided terminal seekers designed to home on the radar cross-section of a large surface combatant. Second wave, launching 30 seconds behind the first, 4 DF-26 variants, the intermediate range version, with a maneuvering re-entry vehicle that can shift its aim point during terminal descent. Total inbound count, 10 missiles in 2 overlapping waves, arriving with a time separation of roughly 60 to 90 seconds. The saturation logic is explicit. 10 inbounds against a defense with a finite number of interceptors and a finite engagement cycle time. If each layer of the defense can handle only so many intercepts per minute, then enough simultaneous inbounds can saturate the system even if each individual missile has a relatively low probability of surviving. You do not need every missile to get through. You need enough to overwhelm the math. Here's the thing that does not make the news. The US Navy has spent 30 years engineering specifically against that math. And the architecture of the response begins not with a missile launch, but with a radar contact 600 kilometers away. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye is the reason this defense does not begin on the back foot. At altitude, with its AN/APS 145 radar rotating at roughly 5 revolutions per minute and its cooperative engagement capability data link fully active, the Hawkeye is looking over the radar horizon of every surface ship in the formation. It sees the DF-21S the moment they crest the top of their arc and begin re-entry. Still well outside the engagement envelope of any surface-based interceptor, but early enough to matter enormously for what comes next. What the Hawkeye does in that moment is not simply detect, it generates a track. A precise, updated, high-confidence track on each inbound object, with velocity, trajectory, and predicted impact point already being computed in real time. That track goes out over the Cooperative Engagement Capability Network, CEC, and lands simultaneously on the Aegis combat systems of both Arleigh Burke destroyers and the cruiser before any of those ships has developed their own radar track. They are receiving a targeting quality picture from the Hawkeye before their own SPY-1D or SPY-6 radars have even confirmed the contacts. Inside the E-2D's cramped fuselage, 3 naval flight officers, the Combat Information Center officer, the Air Control officer, and the radar operator, are working in close coordination, their console screens alive with track data and engagement geometry. The tempo is controlled but urgent. No wasted communication. Every call is clipped, precise, acknowledged. They have trained for this scenario hundreds of times in simulation, and the muscle memory of their procedures is carrying them through the first chaotic seconds of actual track confirmation with something that looks, from the outside, like calm. This is the moment where the scenario gets complicated. Detecting 10 inbounds early is one thing. Generating 10 simultaneous, high-quality firing solutions against Mach 10 targets that are actively descending on varying trajectories, while also managing the engagement geometry of your own interceptors, the defensive maneuvering of the carrier, and the electronic warfare picture, is a problem of a different order. I went through the open literature on Aegis engagement capacity, and one number kept coming back. The Bossline 9 Aegis system is certified for simultaneous engagement of multiple targets, but multiple in this context is a classified figure the Navy does not advertise. What is public is that the system is designed for precisely this scenario, and that the Flight 3 Arleigh Burke with its SPY-6 radar represents a significant generational improvement in sensitivity and tracking capacity over its predecessors. The SP-6, formerly the AN/SP-6V1 air and missile defense radar, offers a sensitivity improvement often cited at roughly 35 times greater than the SPY-1D it replaces. In practical terms, that means earlier detection, more stable tracks on maneuvering targets, and the ability to maintain discrimination, telling apart the warhead from debris and decoys at longer range. Against a DF-26B with a maneuvering reentry vehicle, that discrimination window is critical. If the Aegis system fires on a decoy or a fragment and expends an SM-6, that is an interceptor gone, unavailable for the actual warhead. The Aegis combat system is making these decisions, allocating interceptors, sequencing engagements, managing the geometry, faster than any human can follow. The operators in the Combat Information Center of an Arleigh Burke are supervising a largely automated process while retaining human authority over specific engagement decisions. In the CIC, lighting is red and low. Operators sit in high-backed chairs facing banks of screens displaying tactical feeds, radar returns, and engagement timelines. The Tactical Action Officer, a lieutenant commander, has authority to commit weapons, and that authority is being exercised right now in real time, with the Admiral watching from the command chair behind him. No debate. There is a process, and the process has been rehearsed until it is reflex. But the timeline is compressing fast. 7 minutes from first track to impact. Subtract the time for the Hawkeye to build the picture and pass it. Subtract engagement sequencing. What remains for the SM-6 to do its work is measured in minutes, not hours. The first SM-6 interceptors are away. The Standard Missile-6 is not a simple point defense weapon. It is a dual-mode interceptor capable of active radar homing in its terminal phase, which means it does not depend on the launching ship's radar to illuminate the target all the way to impact. Once the SM-6 is in the vicinity of the inbound missile, its own seeker takes over. At high altitude, against a ballistic target descending at Mach 10, the engagement geometry looks nothing like a conventional surface-to-air missile intercept. The SM-6 has to be placed into a precise volume of sky, a basket, at the right moment, and the lethality depends on a proximity kill or a direct hit against a target that is both fast and now beginning to maneuver. Here's what most people get wrong about ballistic missile defense. The intercept is not a single shot. The Aegis system fires in salvos, multiple SM-6S against each inbound, because the probability of kill for any single interceptor against a maneuvering ballistic target at Mach 10 is not 100%. It is a fraction. A good fraction, but a fraction. The salvo is the answer to that fraction. If each SM-6 has a 60 to 70% probability of kill against a given inbound, a figure that is not publicly confirmed but falls within the range discussed in open defense analyses, then 2 SM-6S fired against the same target give you roughly 90% or better combined probability of kill. Against 10 inbounds, with a finite interceptor magazine, the system has to make real-time decisions about how many rounds to commit to each threat, in what order, leaving enough in reserve for whatever survives. The strange part? This was not supposed to work this cleanly even a decade ago. The DF-21D was designed in an era when Aegis tracking capability against ballistic targets was significantly more limited. The Flight 3 upgrade, the SM-6 Block I upgrade, and the cooperative engagement capability architecture together represent a generational response to exactly this threat. On paper, the DF-21D's theoretical capability looked airtight. In practice, it has to beat an adversary that spent the intervening years specifically hardening each link of the defensive response. What strikes us about this scenario is what it reveals about the economics of deterrence. The DF-26 program represents a decade of Chinese investment in a specific theory, that a handful of precision ballistic missiles could hold an entire carrier strike group at risk and change U.S. strategic calculus in the Pacific. The U.S. response has been not to concede that theory, but to make it progressively more expensive to act on. Every SM-6 fired in this intercept costs several $million. But every DF-26 launched costs tens of millions, requires a full targeting architecture to support it, and if it fails to achieve a hit, the political and military cost of having expended the salvo for zero effect is significant. The kill chain, find, fix, track, target, terminal has to work end to end, and the US defense is built to break it at every step. Now the electronic warfare dimension, because this is where the scenario gets genuinely layered. Here is the question the scenario forces you to confront at the midpoint. Assume the SM-6 salvo performs well. Assume 7 of the 10 inbound missiles are intercepted in the high-end game, altitudes above 50,000 feet on the edge of the atmosphere. 3 inbounds survive and continue descending. They are now in their terminal phase. Their onboard seekers are active, looking for the radar cross-section of a carrier. What happens next depends heavily on decisions the carrier and its escorts have been making since the first track appeared on the Hawkeye. The carrier has been maneuvering. This matters more than it sounds. A Gerald R. Ford-class carrier has a maximum speed in excess of 30 knots, and it has been changing course and speed since the launch was assessed. Against a ballistic missile with a seeker programmed with an aim point based on the carrier's position at launch time, a carrier that has moved 15 miles in 7 minutes may no longer be where the seeker expects it to be. The seeker has to acquire, update, and relock in the terminal seconds. In theory, the DF-26B's terminal guidance is designed to handle target motion, but every additional complication in that terminal phase adds to the attacker's probability of miss. At the same time, the carrier and its escorts are actively working the electromagnetic spectrum, the AN/SLQ-32 electronic warfare system, and its successors, generates jamming, deception, and spoofing across the frequency bands used by the inbound seekers, not to destroy the missile, to confuse its radar picture, to introduce noise into the seeker's target discrimination at the moment it is trying to lock. A seeker that is not certain where the carrier is in the terminal 2 seconds before impact has a problem. That problem is compounded by chaff, clouds of radar-reflective material that create false targets in the seeker's field of view, and by the possible deployment of the Nulka active decoy, a powered standoff decoy that generates a larger and more attractive radar cross-section than the ship it is protecting, drawing the seeker's attention away at exactly the wrong moment for the attacker. Put yourself in the position of that DF-26B seeker for a moment. It has survived the SM-6 intercept. It is in its final descent. It is looking for a carrier. What it sees is a chaff cloud, a powered decoy broadcasting a stronger signal than anything else in the area, jamming across its frequency bands, and a carrier that is not where the targeting data said it would be. The seeker has to sort all of that in under 10 seconds. Some seekers will, some will not. That is the probability game. 3 inbounds in terminal phase. 2 are decoyed or jammed into misses. 1 is still tracking. Now consider what is happening on the carrier's flight deck at this exact moment. Flight operations have been suspended. Aircraft that were in the landing pattern have been waved off or diverted to the alert holding stack. The flight deck crew, ordnancemen, plane captains, fueling teams, have been cleared from the exposed deck surface and driven below. The island structure, rising 8 stories above the flight deck on the starboard side, is being used as a windbreak by sailors caught in the open during the transition from flight operations to damage control posture. Damage control teams are pre-positioned at their zones. Watertight doors below the hangar deck have been secured. The carrier has done everything it can to reduce the consequence of a hit it has not yet been able to prevent. The commanding officer is on the bridge, watching the tactical display. He knows one is still inbound. He knows Phalanx is his last layer. He is not speaking. There is nothing useful to say that the crew does not already know how to do. Phalanx. The Block 1B Phalanx close-in weapon system is the last line of the layered shield. It is not elegant. It is a Vulcan M61 A1 20mm Gatling gun, firing at up to 4,500 rounds per minute, with its own radar and fire control integrated into a single self-contained unit. It does not need to talk to Aegis. It does not need a target designation from the Hawkeye. It acquires, tracks, and engages autonomously. Its purpose is singular: kill what got through everything else. Against a ballistic missile in its terminal phase, descending nearly vertically at Mach 8 or 9, the engagement window for Phalanx is measured in a fraction of a second. The rounds have to intercept the missile's path at the right point. The system works on probability. A burst of depleted uranium rounds into the missile's flight path, hoping to fragment the body or detonate the warhead at sufficient distance to reduce the blast effect on the ship below. Not a guarantee. The last layer of a set of probabilities the attacker had to beat through every prior layer to even reach. A carrier typically carries multiple Phalanx mounts at different positions around the hull: forward, aft, and along each beam, so that regardless of which direction the terminal threat comes from, at least one mount has a firing geometry. The mounts operate independently. If 2 mounts can both acquire the same inbound, both fire. The combined wall of depleted uranium rounds is denser. The probability of fragmenting the inbound before it reaches the ship goes up. Naval architects have spent decades thinking about where on the hull a Phalanx fragmentation kill is close enough to still cause damage, and the damage control pre-positioning reflects that analysis. A kill at 1,000 feet is a different outcome than a kill at 300 feet. Here is the uncomfortable take. Against a genuine large-scale saturation strike, not 10 inbounds, but 30 or 40, with electronic support and coordinated timing designed by people who know exactly how Aegis sequences its engagements. Phalanx would be doing far more work than anyone would be comfortable with. The layered defense is not a guarantee. It is a set of stacked probabilities. At a sufficient saturation level, the math shifts. The attacker does not need to break the shield cleanly. They need to find the number at which the probability of at least one penetration climbs above what the attacker considers acceptable odds. That number is classified. Both sides know it. What does the honest accounting look like? The SM-6 salvo, in our scenario, achieves a high but not perfect intercept rate. The electronic warfare and decoy suite contributes meaningfully to the 2 terminal misses. Phalanx engages the final inbound and achieves a fragmentation kill outside lethal radius, close enough that the carrier takes shrapnel damage to its flight deck but no catastrophic hit. The strike group survives. The carrier operates. But the strike group has now expended a significant fraction of its SM-6 magazine. The Arleigh Burke carries 96 MiG-41 vertical launch system cells, shared across SM-6S, Tomahawks, and other weapons. A carrier strike group does not have unlimited reloads at sea. A second saturation salvo arriving within hours would find a defense with reduced depth. This is the real strategic question underneath the hardware. The magazine depth problem is not new, but it has become more acute as potential threat salvo sizes have grown. In the 1980s, the Soviet anti-ship threat was real, but constrained by the logistics of getting enough aircraft close enough to launch. The ballistic missile threat is different in character. It does not require aircraft to penetrate defended airspace. It does not require submarines to close to torpedo range. The launcher sits ashore, protected by terrain, hardened shelters, and road mobile concealment, and the missile travels its entire arc above the reach of any shipborne interceptor until the final minutes. The asymmetry is that the attacker can reload on land between salvos faster than the defender can reload at sea. A fast combat support ship can conduct an underway replenishment of VLS cells, but that process takes time, requires the strike group to slow and maintain a predictable course, and creates a vulnerability window of its own. The magazine problem is not solved by the existence of the replenishment capability. It is only partially mitigated. Here's what deserves more attention in public discussions of this scenario. The smarter play for the defender may not be to spend expensive SM-6 interceptors on every inbound at maximum range. The smarter play may be to lean harder on upstream disruption, attacking the kill chain before the missiles launch. F/A-18 Super Hornets and F-35S operating from the carrier can reach shore-based radar and communications nodes. The submarine running ahead of the formation is not just a sensor, it carries Tomahawk cruise missiles. If the targeting architecture that feeds the DF-21D and DF-26 launch vehicles can be disrupted, if the fix and track links of the kill chain are broken before the order to fire is given, then no amount of terminal guidance capability on the missile matters. You cannot guide a missile to a target you cannot see. Most people assume the carrier's job in this scenario is purely defensive. The evidence suggests the Carrier Strike Group's actual response playbook is more offensive than that. So what does this tell us about the balance of power in the Western Pacific? The DF-21D and DF-26 represent a genuine capability. They are not paper weapons. The investment China has made in the targeting architecture to support them, the surveillance satellites, the over-the-horizon radars, the maritime patrol aircraft, the network of sensors across the first island chain, is real. The theory that a carrier strike group can be held at risk by precision ballistic missiles is a serious strategic calculation that has already changed how the US Navy thinks about force posture, basing, and the geometry of Pacific operations. But the kill chain is long. 5 links, all of which have to survive against an adversary whose doctrine, training, and technology are specifically oriented toward breaking each of them. The E-2D Hawkeye sees earlier. The SPW-6 tracks better. The SM-6 intercepts at ranges and altitudes that were not possible a decade ago. The Cooperative Engagement Capability Network means a missile can be intercepted by a ship that never developed its own radar track. The Electronic Warfare Suite makes the terminal phase a probability problem rather than a certainty. And the carrier's ability to put F/A-18 Super Hornets and F-35S in the air, armed with anti-radiation missiles, jamming pods, and precision strike weapons, means the carrier is not a passive target. It is an offensive platform that can reach back. No single layer of that shield is a guarantee. The combination of all of them, stacked probabilities, each one independently imposing a cost on the attacker, is the architecture of deterrence. The attacker has to beat every layer, every time. The defender only has to make the cost of trying high enough that launching looks like a bad bet. That is not the same as invincible. It is better than invincible in some ways, and worse in others. It requires continuous investment to stay current. But it works by making the attacker's calculation harder at every step. Here is the open question we genuinely cannot answer for you, and we think it is worth dropping in the comments. When the threat is a saturation salvo and the magazine is finite, is the right answer to spend interceptors on every inbound at maximum range, or to lean on maneuver, deception, and breaking the targeting chain before the first missile leaves the ground? Both strategies carry real costs, and neither is obviously dominant. Vote in the comments. We read them. If you want to go deeper on how the kill chain works upstream, how the US actually tries to blind the targeting architecture before a strike can even be ordered, that breakdown is next. Subscribe so you see it when it drops.